What's up, suckers? Currently driving on my way to my favorite place to buy succulents, or my second favorite, I should say, because it's not the farmer's market. But crazy enough, this is my second video for YouTube. So again, what's up, suckers? I get asked all the time, who the heck am I, and why should you care about succulents? And the answer is, I don't know. I went to school for marine biology. This wasn't my intention to have a career in botany of any sort. And botany is the study of plants, if you didn't know. I did end up taking like 5 different botany courses, one of them being phycology, which is the study of seaweed or plants that you find in the ocean. And that was informative, really. I did learn a lot, but all my other courses that covered any type of botany ultimately gave me like 75 to 80% of the knowledge that I have concerning succulents. So that was really cool, and that's where I'm able to pull all this information from. The other maybe 25 to 20% I pull from the internet. Of course I do. And why do I do that? Because I don't have every single answer. I see a lot of problems with succulents and I want to figure out what they are, or I find a new succulent that I've never owned before and I want to know how to grow it or propagate it, or, you know, maybe turn this into a career. I don't know. So here I am. I just recently did some purchases, and so I'll show you guys my, what I call grab bag. Basically, I grabbed a container and just kind of grabbed all the succulents that I could fit in that container, and then I bought them and I took them home. So I will be planting those in the short amount of time after this intro. Another reason that I like succulents is because they're negligible, so I can neglect them. I right now have 2 jobs, and so I don't have time to just sit around and stare at my plants and wait for them to dry up and then be like, oh, I forgot to water them. So my favorite part is that I can, majority of my plants, majority of my succulents only have to be watered once a week, and then they are good to go. And typically I can do it either super early in the morning, which for me is like 6 a.m., or late at night, which is like 8:39. And even then, they still survive and they thrive in the area. Right now, my cats have gotten to 3 of my succulents, so I'm going to have to start moving them. Not just for my cats, but because also winter is coming, and with that, we get a lot of cold fronts, because I am Bayside. That is not San Francisco. That's way up north in California. 6 hours from most, 8 hours from the rest of you, and then well enough in another state from the rest of the world. So right now it's sunny in August, which is fine, but by nighttime, majority of succulents, their minimal temperature is 36 to 48 degrees Fahrenheit, and once it hits that, that's it, that's their cap. So it could potentially get too cold. So basically what then happens is that so succulents can freeze or go through frost, and then they can also end up going into shock, which is basically it just either stops growing entirely or reverts back to a smaller version of itself to save the main part of the plant. And the way that it does that is typically it will start necrosis, which is basically just cell death, and it starts dropping off leaves that are on the base of the plant, just to basically save itself. So that's also a problem. So I'm eventually going to be moving all of my succulents from the top part of the balcony to the bottom part of the balcony, and then I'll be able to do an actual show me, which basically I walk around and we'll do an actual guided tour of what succulents I have. And then eventually in another video, I'm going to be doing a story time where basically I have a succulent book and I'm going to grab a bunch of random succulents and I'm going to read to you, and I'm going to explain how it does in drought. So if you live in Texas or, you know, let's say Arizona, I'll be able to explain what kind of succulents you can purchase if you're interested. That way, if you decide you don't necessarily want cactuses, you want to go for a succulent, but maybe grow it indoors, I can explain that and how to do that, how to care for it. high humidity. So if you're in Florida or my friend in New Zealand, hi, I'll be able to explain what a good succulent for that is. So that way you have an idea of what to look out for. Also, I will be talking about the problem succulents, so basically what to look out for if you go to a basic store where they sell succulents. So that way you can decide if you're going to save it, if you can, or if you're going to go with another succulent. And at this point, you know, there's a lot of online places that you can order succulents from if you don't have a retail service that sells you succulents. It's all cactuses, or it's all just basic flowering plants. And so I will eventually talk about that later on in this video. This will probably be a long-ish video. I did end up doing, like I said earlier, a purchase. So I'll be talking about that. But yes, so this is video number 2. And tune in soon. Eventually I'll start doing shout outs as well as giveaways. So hopefully that will be something fun. I do have a bunch of stuff kind of lined up, but having it done to send is kind of difficult. So let's go talk about our grab bag. See ya, suckers. All right, so now we're home. This is a different scenery than you usually see me in. I'm usually outside, but it's late. It's dark out, so if I tried to use the light that's outside, it's not going to help anybody do anything. And especially I want the focus to be on the colors of the succulents and the textures of the succulents, and I can't really do that with darkness. So I did a little purchasing, and this is not sponsored, but just a suggestion. It's just a suggestion. I bought this book just as like a basic guide to some of the other succulents I don't own. And like I said, most of my knowledge comes from the internet or YouTube, and so I was able to find a relatively decent book that definitely helped me. And again, not sponsored, but it's definitely a shout out. The colors and the references in it gives you characteristic, cultivation, and area of origin, and then how to care for it. That was a big help for me, and especially that's where I'll be pulling most of the information from for my story time. So my grab bag, we're going to talk about my grab bag right now. So the first one we're going to talk about is my Haworthia. As you can see, it's pushing dirt, so it's really jam-packed in there. And so this is typically the number one item that I go for when I go to a store. Is I find roots out the bottom, or I find it's pushing soil, and so I will go absolutely bonkers and try to buy these as quickly as possible, so that way I can essentially save them. So I've got fabric down, don't worry, I'm not just gonna throw stuff around, but I'm gonna tilt you down. So I got my nice pot of dirt. I only fill it up a quarter of the way, because then by the time I empty this out, most of the rest of it will be in here. So to get them out, you have to squeeze the dirt really good. Jeez Louise. Yep. See, so this is called root bound or root binding. It's basically the pot's been too small for too long. And so typically, yeah, you'll see more roots than soil. Another way that you know it's ready to move on is that your succulent is taller or bigger than the pot that it's in. And typically when I first bring these guys home, I immediately transfer them. I don't like them sitting, even if their soil is wet. And the reason I also don't like their soil to be wet is because that means they've been overwatered. So they're just sitting in this water, and that can cause some serious damage. So what we're doing now is just basically breaking up those roots. You can hear it. Yeah, you hear that? So it's been in this state for a very long time, and it's ready to move on. It does have some babies at the bottom here, and then it's almost got a whole other succulent going on. So I'm super excited about this. Eventually I'll be able to kind of break it up, because this looks like a separate one as well. It just happens to be tossed into the pot. So there we are. It's a little bit looser. It doesn't feel so packed. And when you do this, you will lose some roots. Don't worry about it. They're succulents, so they do really well afterwards, and you can still save them. So just basically tossing in soil. I'm going to rotate the pot, and then again with succulents, because I don't want to overwater them, I want the soil to be really loose. And then as I water it and as time goes by, I'll be able to pack it in there, but I don't want it as tight as it was before because I want those roots to spread outwards. So that's how I transplant pots. Basically this guy is ready to go. I'll give him about maybe a month to ultimately fill out this pot, because the cool thing about these guys is that they grow really fast. So if you aren't careful, they'll outgrow the pot. All right, so that is one. The next one that I have is a sedum. And essentially, it's madness. So when I first bought this, the lady asked me why it was so cheap for so much. And so I had to point out that the majority of the leaves that already fell off are already starting to create new succulents. So that's super exciting because then I don't have to pull it apart. It's already done for me. And again, it's in too small of a pot. It's not terrible for the size of succulent, but definitely needs a little bit of saving. So I'm definitely going to do that. I have other things falling down. So I've got my purple pot here, and I'm going to transplant most of it because it's already in a relatively big pot. It just kind of needs to be broken up. So I'll probably grab the biggest one that's ultimately trying to escape. And another reason that they do grow in such a pattern, as you can see half the base is empty, is because they're trying to achieve more sunlight. And in order to do that, you ultimately have to break out. So definitely going to pull this guy apart. Definitely needs a little bit of help, but I will get it the help it so desires. And then for the little ones, I'm probably just going to use my very simple small pot and just put them right on top. And one thing you want to make sure you don't do when you first get little propagations like this, this one's okay because it has some roots, but when you first find propagations and they don't have roots, so this one's all right, it's got roots. If it doesn't have roots, you don't want to water it yet, because the problem with watering it is that without roots, there's no way to absorb that water into the actual leaf itself to feed the leaflet. Here we go. Here's a good example. Look how cute that is. And so it can cause, you can basically, if you overwater it, it can create mold. We definitely don't want mold on our succulents. Otherwise, that defeats the purpose of even owning succulents. I will also show an example of etolation, and then like what happens when you get a succulent that hasn't been actually cared for. So I've got a couple examples of that, that's for sure. All right, so just trying to break this up again, doing the same thing as we were before, just breaking up the roots. Cool thing about this is that it's 3, so I can ultimately split this up into half if I wanted. So there's 1, there's 2. And then again, just burying it with basic soil. No problems there. I'm going to keep these guys together until the time comes to ultimately have a bigger pot for this guy. Because right now all I have is my plastic pots, and I don't think those are very sturdy, but we'll see what we can do as time goes on. One of the many questions that I get asked is, like, when you first get a succulent, does it have to be in an appropriate succulent cactus soil? Can I just use a basic soil? And for first time, yes, you can use any type of soil ultimately, but for the success of the succulent, the nutrients built into the succulent soil are much better preserved for your succulents rather than just basic flowering plants. So I would definitely look into something like that and making sure to not like forego the importance of succulent soil for succulents. And then the same goes for cactus. It's typically called succulent cactus palm soil, and the nutrients are designed for such organisms and plants. And so that is 3. I will have to go get more soil for the other succulents that I have planned for us from my grab bag. But that's basically what I do as far as buying and purchasing succulents, is that if they're not from my favorite person at the farmer's market, I typically will bring them home and put them in brand new pots and try to get them the appropriate amount of sunlight or shade or water, depending on what they require pertaining to their species. So that's 1. He's doing really well. I was able to bury him all the way to the bottom, and his root system is relatively small, so I'm hoping to ultimately pick him up. And then the same goes for these 2. This one might end up needing to go in a taller pot, but we'll see as time goes by. So those are that. 1 becomes 3. And so that is succulent number 4. Now, succulent number 5 is an agave. And the way you can differentiate an agave from an aloe is agaves have these spines that cover them. And some aloes do have spines on the side. Don't get me wrong, but this entire surface is covered in spines. Base, so you can kind of see the bumpy. All this entire surface is covered in spines. So that's how you can differentiate an agave from an aloe. And you can have smooth spine aloe, so it's not a misconception between the 2. Again, lots of root binding, so definitely need some help. This is 2, so ultimately I'll keep them in the same pot, but I'll completely separate them, and I hope that they will take off on their own. Shout out to the girl at Murphy's. She ended up walking up to me. Strangely enough, I wasn't wearing one of my t-shirts. I didn't have one of my bags. She just happened to walk up to me and ask me if I think these would get bigger. And so we kind of started a conversation, which you know I love doing. And funny enough, I was able to kind of tell her, like, hey, actually you're asking literally the right person, because this is what I'm currently doing on YouTube is, you know, I started out on Reddit and here I am trying to create YouTube videos, and I'm kind of going crazy, but hey, let's do this. You know, it's a great conversation, great topic, I think. And again, succulents aren't for everyone, but if I can get at least, 5 people to be interested in, whether you're a botany student or anything at this point, if you're interested, you're interested. It's awesome. Another question I commonly get asked is like, how am I sure how much water I'm supposed to give my succulent? And basically anything that's this size can do well enough, at least to start with like a teaspoon. And then as you're paying attention to the growth of your succulent, then you can definitely add more. Some of my succulents do well with up to a tablespoon, and then some of them do really, really well with a small cup, which is like a measuring cup of 1. But great part about watering is this will cover all of the succulents that are on my table. And I will show you what craziness is going on over here, as I am surrounded by succulents right now, and all of that water will cover all of these guys. So that's what I enjoy also about succulents, is that I have learned to not have the concern that I'm going to overwater them. So with agaves or aloes, depending on the way that they're growing, do not water inside. Basically what happens is it's a microscope effect. So what you're doing is you're grabbing a magnifying glass to the sun, and then it's burning your succulent because that water's not evaporating quickly enough. So you want to water just the roots and not the succulent itself. There are some succulents that do really well when you water their leaflets, but agaves and aloes do not, because they're already so full of water. You don't want to put water on the outside because all the cells on the inside go outside. Basic biology. All right, so then we're going to talk about my sedum, and this guy is also totes ready to go. He's in need of movement, so we're definitely going to take care of him. And then at the same time, we're going to take care of my aloe. Now again, aloes are known to have thick and succulent leaves. And so typically if you peel off this layer, you can see all the vein work on the inside, and that's what ultimately stores all the water, and that's what differentiates most succulents from other basic plants, is that if you get to a leaf of the succulent, it's absolutely full of water, and you don't have to water it all that often. Now again, there's a root hanging out on the bottom here, so I'm going to be very careful pulling this guy out. Root bound. Again, say it with me. Root bound. So, just going to break him up a little bit. Going to do it right here so you can see. I am creating a small mess, but that is my mess to clean and your mess to watch. So, again, problem with most succulents that I buy, soil is absolutely soaked through. So that's the base of him. He's pretty brown, so I'm actually not worried about him having absorbed too much water. But I do have a succulent outside that we will compare to later. I'll have a whole video series about overwatering versus underwatering, and I'll ultimately show the problems with overwatering. And right now I haven't watered him in over a month and a half because they absolutely soaked him. He came with 5 and now he's the only one left. And so I'm ultimately trying to nurse him back to health so that way he can start growing roots, so I can start watering those roots so he can grow big and strong. And right now he's about the size of a quarter. And you know, it didn't make me very happy when I first got it home, because when I see it and I purchase it, I think, all right, perfect, I'm gonna save it. But then, like, as soon as I got home, I realized that he was pretty much a lost cause. One of these sibling plants ended up already having a hole in it, and that's because the water just sat for a little too long. So we're going to move my sedum now out of its itty bitty pot into a little bit bigger pot. He's nice and pliable and squishy, and their roots are very thin and fibrous, so I'm actually not worried about it growing up and out. So again, I'm still just going to squish and rotate, break off some of that super wet, and then ultimately just put him in his new pot and cover his roots again with soil that is dry. And right now I'm looking ahead to the future of my succulents, because where I live, we're almost at rain season. So I've got the concern of like overwatering or just overabsorption from the air. So I will have to pay attention to that. Now, I do have 2 more succulents to discuss, but here's the crazy part. They're unknown. So we've got this guy, which again, he's got a lot of good growth, and my book actually doesn't discuss him. And then at the same time, this guy, he doesn't have a name quite yet. I'm still doing my research, but these guys are built a little bit differently. I have one that's very similar to this, but it's big. So I'm ultimately going to be looking up what these guys are and then later on discussing them. Because the really interesting part about this is that in between each leaf, there's already a new succulent growing. And so it's almost like an eternal succulent. It just keeps sprouting new babies and then growing again. So that's super exciting. And from what I did find out about these 2, as far as like, you know, I'm only missing the name, but the information I do have, these 2, if I'm not careful, will quickly outgrow the pot that I put them in. So we're gonna go hard or go home, and we're gonna put them in these guys. Now I do have one that's very similar. It's actually this one, same growth pattern. So this is where I'm deriving the information from, is this one. So I just have to figure out what these guys are, which I'll probably end up actually putting them in that pot just to observe. All right, so now that we have 2 mystery succulents, and while I'm starting to pot them, I'm actually going to talk about problems that I often come across. So number 1 problem is actually overwatering, which is obvious. We talk about it all the time. And so you ask, you're like, Mother Earth, what do you mean overwatering? And this is what I mean. The place that I purchased him from ended up absolutely, they put him in a plastic bag and then they left him to float. So now he's officially gone in shock. He's dropping off all of his, what was super healthy leaves, and they're turning translucent. So they turn super see-through. You can almost like see through the other side. So that is a huge problem that I experience. It's just, this is what they do. Like I said earlier, especially they can do this with frost. They go into shock. They basically drop off what they feel is necessary, and then they save the rest of them. But the rest of them is good. The rest of them is green. So easy enough. Just put him in brand new soil and let him kind of take a breather. I'm not going to water him this round. I will actually wait a bit and make sure that he doesn't go through any more periods of shock. And then after that, he should be good to go. So with these guys, now that they've dropped off all of their leaves, you want to basically replant like it's a baby succulent. So even though its stalk is much longer than it now that he's got all these open wounds, essentially, you want to plant. So it's almost like a band-aid for these guys. So you basically want to just gently rest this on the bottom and then bury up to the top of the succulent and just let him breathe. You know, he's going to have very good heavy nutrient soil that's going to ultimately bring him back. But unfortunately for the rest of him, this is what I encounter on a daily, is that I go to places that don't know how to take care of succulents, or they were just basically told it's a plant, water it, and they water them every day, or they water them, you know, twice a day at this point, because one person clocks on, they water it, one person clocks off, and then a couple hours later one person clocks on and they water it again. And so essentially you're creating this tumultuous relationship between the succulent and water, and then you're just leaving it to float, and that is not cool. So there he is. He's buried all the way up to the top. I'm going to again let him breathe, just give him some time, and ultimately the rest of him looks really good. So I'm actually relatively impressed that he dropped off so much and still looks so good to me. So I'll probably name him Bunny. He looks like he has little bunny ears. And we're just gonna let him chill. I'll keep an eye on him. I will take a photo and then do updates after that. And then common succulent that everybody encounters on the daily and is the easiest to grow, easiest to care for, is Echeveria. That's Echevria. And I suggest this all the time because they're so simple to care for. And cute thing about Echeverias is that they kind of go crazy and grow whatever which way they feel like. And this one I did not encounter a problem with him when I first purchased, so that the only casualties I have was 2, and that's no problem. Ignore the dog, he's growling at the neighbors. So I got these 2 spots open, so I'm just gonna have the cousins all together and then essentially discover what species they are and ultimately talk about them after that. So we're just gonna, not terribly root bound, still kind of squished, but yeah. I bought this from a grocery store as my first grab bag. This was definitely not my favorite place to shop for succulents, but they just happened to be having a sale, and I decided to go absolutely crazy, like I am, a crazy succulent lady, excuse me. And just ultimately, this is my first pick, first grab bag. And then my second grab bag we will discuss at a later date. That way I'm not, you know, making you watch a whole hour long. But this is ultimately what I was actually discussing on Reddit, was just basically how to replant, how to care for, and then etc., you know, answering the ultimate questions of why succulents and, ooh, what are we doing today? So that was, you know, I really enjoyed having those videos on Reddit, starting out on Reddit, because just I felt like it was such a good conversation between strangers and, you know, being able to kind of suggest. And then I ended up getting a couple emails from different people. One of them was a couple, and they bought their first succulents because of me, because of my videos, and they feel like they're well equipped with the information that they need to ultimately have it thrive and survive. And they were also one of the ones that suggested I start a YouTube channel. That way they can kind of follow along, and if they encounter any problems, well, they've already got me filming. So I thought that was very touching. That kind of makes me happy. Also, if anybody happens to see a succulent that they really like and they want to draw it, I can feature your art in my videos and then officially give a shout out, because a lot of people have asked if they could draw my succulents, and I'm still kind of waiting for those photos. So eventually. All right. So then problem number 2 I encounter with succulents is, now I'm going to double check this word, but I believe it's etolation. That's E-T-O-L-A-T-I-O-N, or there's an I in there somewhere, I feel. But basically, it's when they're escaping. So this one's not as bad. He's a baby. But this is a problem. So basically, my cats, and we even talked about this before in a Reddit video. People asked me, how do your cats feel about your plants? And at the time, they were okay. But one of my cats ended up jumping up on the balcony, and this went bye-bye. So a lot of the leaves at the base are now damaged. The rest of them are okay, so I should be able to just gently pop them off, and hopefully I can just re-propagate this guy, and then again bury it up to a point, start it over like it's a baby. Kind of disappointing when I first went outside and realized that there was a succulent down, but again, succulents are easy to fix, easy to heal. Just have to make sure you do it right and do it quickly. Dusty. It's like dirt or something. So just getting rid of the necrosis or cell death. It's all crunchy on this side, which that does happen with a lot of succulents, especially when you get them from stores that don't ultimately know how to care for them. And then I will eventually be able to show a comparison of like what my succulents typically look like when I first buy them from the farmer's market. So that's actually a really healthy stalk. I'm quite proud. It's not super mushy or wet at all. Very, very firm. So despite falling and just breaking a couple leaves, this guy is actually good to go. He's probably still gonna live a long, long time, as long as I do my job. So very happy with that. And just putting him back in soil. I will eventually go through and pluck off the remaining leaves, but I wanted to show like ultimately what to look out for when you go grocery shopping. And so just, you know, basically a little bit of damage to a succulent is not a bad thing. You can fix it easily by bringing it directly home, putting it directly into cactus and succulent soil, and then just letting it breathe. Don't water it when you first get home, because oftentimes when you do that, somebody's already watered it that day, and so you're creating more of a hazard or drowning feature because you have overwatered it, and they have already overwatered it for you. So by the time you get it home, you're doubly drowning it. So now I'm going to quickly show you how I water my succulents, and then that will be the end of this video, and I will be able to ultimately post more videos as weeks go on. I found this great website that allows me to like edit my YouTube videos very quickly, so that's ultimately what I'm using, and it's really easy. I was kind of shocked, especially considering I'm doing this by myself. I don't have a person to help me film. I don't have a coworker. I don't have friends or family that ultimately I want to tie into this. I've had another YouTube YouTuber basically go through this tumultuous relationship with somebody, and they demanded money and so much percentage of the stock of the videos, and they had to go to court, and he wasn't able to post YouTube videos for almost a year, and so now he's able to, and that's just, I don't want to encounter that. So like for now, because I have 2 jobs, I'm ultimately just going to be posting 1 video a week, but eventually I hope to start posting like maybe 2, keep it base at 1. I'm definitely not gonna let it slide unless something comes up. So here we go to water succulents very quickly. We're gonna briefly do this. So we're gonna start with this guy, and basically I'm going to water directly in the center, and that's it. That's all the water that I'm going to do. I can also grab a measuring cup if that helps. So I got this from my iron. It's 150 milliliters, 100 milliliters, 50 milliliters, and obviously you can guess there's a 25 ml somewhere. Oops. Sorry. So I actually like using this when I go to water my succulents because it's a lot smaller. You can see the size comparison. It's a lot smaller, and it's able to fit into the tiniest of spaces. So these are my propagations. As you can see, water's already coming out, so you don't need that much water. Especially since they don't have a root system quite yet. Boom, done. That is it. I still have a ton of water. Boom. You don't want that much water. You will drown your succulents. Succulents are prone for overwatering. This is another one that I experience often. It's just basically he's dried up and withered, but I'm still watering him because there's still roots. So then again, don't water the actual succulent, water the roots because you can create problems. Nice and big area for the root system itself. This guy's growing sideways, so I'm going to kind of do a line. That way it gets all of him because he does have such a big system. So I'll do it twice only, and that's it. I'm not going to touch him again. This one, again, because he's so big, slightly tilt my pot. Still have water left in the bottom. Have not run out yet. So you can definitely get away with not overwatering your succulents. But you can underwater them. So I'm going to add a little bit more water to my cup and then do this guy just one more time. And I'll rotate him because he does have a tiny baby on this side, so I want to make sure to get all the way around. So there's that. And you'll want to do that for the really round ones. Make sure that you get both sides, especially if they do have some propagations off to the side. You want to make sure that you ultimately water both, even if the root system is still technically attached. You just want to make sure that you provide that availability. Already watered him. And so what's left is these through. So I'm just going to basically rain it. So I only filled it up to the very top line, which is 150 mils. I still have water left over, so you can get away with absolutely not overwatering your succulents. And again, if you're new to this, as soon as you bring it home, just basically do little water. Don't stress that you're underwatering it, because you can always add water, but you can't take it away. All right, so that is it for this video. I hope you liked this. Please give me a like, give me a subscribe, and then honestly, put in the comments below ultimately what you want us to talk about in the future. Or if you have any further questions, I'll absolutely be able to answer them. But with that being said, peace out, suckers. And it won't stop. It's not stopping. Help.